hello everybody. Welcome to the Expanding Effective Contraceptive Options, or the EECO project's results dissemination for the pilot introduction of the Caya Diaphragm in Niger and Benin. So I'm Tabitha. I'm figuring most people on this call know who I am. I'm the AOR for EECO. So the EECO project, as a reminder, was really designed to support pilot introduction of new and improved contraceptive methods that address method-related reasons for non-use and better meet reproductive health needs. So I want to welcome WCG Cares, PSI, and ABMS. Our two presenters today are Alexandra Angel, who is an FPRH technical advisor with PSI, where she's worked on a number of new FPRH priorities, including quality of care, person-centered FP counseling, digital health, and new FP product introduction. For the past 4 years, she's provided guidance for the EECO project's introduction of the Caya Diaphragm and gel in Niger and Benin. And also a welcome to Ando Tiana Robelson, who is the Deputy Director of the Beninese Association for Social Marketing and Communication, known as EBMS. And if you're not speaking, please put yourself on mute. So as Deputy for ABMS, Dr. Robelson oversees the EECO project in Benin and has provided critical guidance for the local introduction and pilot of Caya. So in prior roles, Dr. Robelson has worked as a lead MNCH technical advisor for PSI and has worked with World Vision, leading their international health response portfolio in humanitarian settings. So welcome again to our presenters, and I'll hand it over to Alexandra to start the presentation.
Thank
and again,
you.
If you're not speaking, if you're not a presenter, please put yourself on mute. I'm going to do the same.
Thanks, Tabitha. Danielle, I think you can move to the next slide, and I'll also, thank you to Tabitha for the introduction, and thank you to everyone on the call for being here to learn a little bit more about some of the work that the EECO project has done. As Tabitha just noted, the EECO project focuses on introducing methods through small pilot introductions, learning from that, sharing the learnings, and then making recommendations for future potential scale up. Go to the next slide, where we just have a visual of the suite of methods that EECO has worked on introducing to different countries around the globe. Some of them you'll see are not brand new products to the world as a whole, but they certainly are new to the places where they're being introduced. And we have a couple of little quiz questions or polls that are going to pop up during this presentation. So the first one's going to come right now. You'll see that Caya is one of the methods up here, and it's certainly the method we're going to focus on today. And so a quick test of what you might know already about Caya. We should see that on the screen now. Which of the following facts about the Caya diaphragm are true? It's reusable for 3 years, does not require a provider fitting, it's available in most of Africa, and it's been available in Europe for around 10 years. And click all that apply. And I think Danielle will let us know when it's ready to share the results of the poll. Okay, here we are. I can see this on my screen. It looks like there's a bit of a mix of different submissions or answers that people have responded to. The two correct answers here is that it does not require a provider fitting and that it has been available in Europe for about 10 years. Caya is reusable, but it is reusable for 2 years. So a little bit of a trick question for you. And let's move to the next slide, where I'll just share a little bit more information about the Caya diaphragm. So with funding from USAID and others, PATH developed the Caya diaphragm, which has been available in Europe for around 10 years and is now marketed in nearly 40 high and middle income countries. Caya addresses key drawbacks that earlier generation of diaphragm models encompassed. So one of those is that Caya is a single size fits most product. And so that eliminates the need for women to go to a healthcare provider to get a fitting and to have an exam before adopting the method. And of course, this is wonderful for a lot of reasons, partly because it also makes the product simpler to supply and provide, especially in resource constrained settings. Women also report that they typically find Caya to be comfortable and easy to use. And that's thanks to some of the differences that we see between Caya and prior generations of diaphragms. You see some of that indicated in the diagram around Caya on the slide. And then there's a couple of other characteristics and benefits about the method below that. Caya is also indicated for use with a gel. Caya gel has been introduced along with the diaphragm in the countries where EECO has introduced the method. It's a water-based gel and does not contain inoxaline as many spermicides do. We'll go to the next slide. And here's where I'll talk about the specific introduction and the research that was done in Niger. So before moving into that, I have a next question for the group to see what you might already know about this context. What is the most commonly used modern FP method in Niger? Male condoms, oral contraceptive pills, injectables, or implants? Again, I'll give us just a moment to respond. Okay, and here we are. So it looks like many of you know Niger quite well. Oral contraceptive pills are the most commonly used modern FP method. And if we move to the next slide, we'll see a little bit more about this particular context in terms of FP. So we're looking here at Niamey specifically, which is where Caya was introduced in Niger. So this is the large urban center, capital. Modern method use is still fairly low, even in Niamey. And then we see there the method mix, which is quite skewed towards oral contraceptive pills. And even when looking at the next couple of methods, we see that really the shares are quite large among oral contraceptive pills, injectables, and implants. So all modern hormonal methods of contraception. You go to the next slide. Just a quick reminder of the introduction model that we had in Niger to introduce Caya. I won't spend a ton of time here. I want to focus a little bit more on the research, but I think this will be interesting to keep in mind when we move into the presentation that Anda will give about the introduction in Benin, is there's a little bit of a difference in introduction models. And if you're really interested in all of the details around this, we did publish a programmatic brief a couple of years ago that details this at some length. So we introduced Caya through three channels: the public sector, the private sector, and through community-based distribution, where CHWs were able to provide the method directly to clients. In some places, the method was sold for 500 CFA. And then in some places where it made more sense, it was free distribution to those interested in Caya. Next slide. And then another quick slide around distribution. So what you're looking at here, the dotted lines are the distribution of Caya Diaphragm in the darker and Caya Gel in the green, the lighter color. And then those solid lines were our stock level total over the course of activities. So you'll see that as the project progressed, as the activities progressed in Niger, we did distribute, as of September 2021, our full stock of diaphragms, and Caya Gel, which users resupply. We still have some small number left, but are approaching the number that we originally procured. Next slide. So here we are looking at what we wanted to learn about this method and the introduction and some of the findings that we found. So in terms of objectives, what we wanted to learn about were understanding the client experience with the Caya Diaphragm and Gel, understanding the role that male partners played in choosing Caya or in using Caya, and understanding the factors that were enabling or impeding use. This was a mixed method study, so a quant and a qual arm. For the quantitative portion, we surveyed 150 female adopters of Caya. And to be included in the survey, they needed to be between the ages of 18 and 49 to be in Niamey, and to have selected Caya as their method 6 months prior to the survey. In terms of who were our populations for the in-depth interviews, we interviewed 55 people. 25 were female users, and that was the same inclusion criteria for them. We talked with 15 men who had been sensitized to Caya and FP in general, and we talked as well to 15 providers who had been trained to provide Caya. And those providers came from across the different channels we were working. The results of this study have been published at this point and published last month in GHSP. And so I'll drop the link at some point in the chat where you can read the full results and everything we found. And then the next slides, I'll just give sort of the overview, the snapshot of all of that. So next slide, where I'll focus first on the quantitative results. Our quantitative survey was limited to finding information around continued use of Caya, and if a woman discontinued, why she was choosing to discontinue. So you'll see here that a smaller number of women chose to discontinue the method, 35 of the 150 women surveyed, and the top reason for discontinuing was that they wished to become pregnant. Following that, among the 22 other women who discontinued, were a number of method-related reasons or lifestyle-related reasons for choosing to stop using Caya. At the bottom here, we have this really interesting number around women who were continuing to use the method. So at 6 months, 76.7% of women were continuing to use Caya. And this includes those women. This analysis included women who were discontinuing use simply because they desired to become pregnant. Next slide, where I'll start moving into what we saw in the qualitative results. This analysis from interviews comes from across the 3 populations that were included in IDI. So that's the women who had adopted Caya, men who had been sensitized, and providers. The insights on acceptability were derived from deductive thematic analysis of the IDIs, and these are the different themes that we looked at. A little bit of information about the women who participated in this part of the study. The average age was 30 years. All women were married that we interviewed, and only 2 of those no longer wanted further children. Each of these themes we look at some depth in the paper, but I've sort of combined them in some ways on some of the next slides. We'll start on the next slide with results around choosing Caya, using Caya, and satisfaction with the method. In general, there was really wide appreciation for this method, particularly because of the fact that it broadened the choice of non-hormonal options. And all of the users that were interviewed expressed some level of satisfaction with Caya. It was based on the results. It's a method that can attract both new users of FP, those who have never used a modern method in the past, and also lapsed FP users, those who had tried some method in the past and been dissatisfied with it, were no longer using a method. Many of the women that participated in the interviews were not using a modern method of family planning the day before having adopted Caya. And then there weren't many switchers. There weren't many women who were coming directly from another method. There were only 11 who had changed from one method directly to Caya. The fact that Caya is an on-demand method, that it is user-controlled, that a woman can use it at the time of sex, but then doesn't have to think about it or do anything related to Caya when she doesn't need it in the moment. That was also something that was cited as a really important characteristic that clients and users appreciated. In particular, women who also stated that they had infrequent sex mentioned this and particularly appreciated this new method. Sometimes women talked about having partners that traveled for work or that they themselves traveled for work, and so had long periods of time when they were not in need of FP because they were not with their sexual partner. At the same time, because Caya is on demand, while many of the users talk about using Caya always, every time they have sex, some users, 6 of them, talked about only using Caya sometimes. when talking about why they would use it sometimes but not others. One user talked about feeling sometimes too lazy to use Caya, or they talked about it being an inconvenient time to use the method. Another interesting finding is around pairing the use in Niger, pairing the use of Caya with oral contraceptive pills. There were a fair minority of people, of women, who stated that they were using both methods throughout the 6 months that they had adopted Caya, or at some point during those 6 months. Next slide. So looking at non-use and discontinuation, we asked the women who participated in IDIs, who were all users themselves, but we asked them from their perspective, why might others in the community choose not to use or to discontinue if they had at one point adopted Caya. The thing that we heard the most was that it was not a well-known method, that there just wasn't enough information yet available. It wasn't widely available, and that was a reason why people wouldn't adopt it. There were then a couple of other things mentioned related to the method itself. Some specific about Caya, such as the need to leave it inserted for 6 hours post-sex. Some more general comments talking about misconceptions about a method, and those being reasons someone might not use Caya. But of course, I think that's something we see across lots of different methods. We asked the same question of providers, who shared some of their own perceptions, but then also shared some things that clients had shared with them if they had chosen a different method over Caya, or if they had discontinued and come back for a different method. A few providers reported that clients had discontinued because they found the method themselves uncomfortable or annoying. That particular clients may have been uncomfortable with the insertion process, or reported that their husbands either could feel Caya during sex, or that they were generally unsupportive of Caya use. Their partners were unsupportive of Caya use or FP in general. Next slide. Here I'll talk a little bit about gel use and then a little bit about male engagement. In terms of gel use, I think one of the main takeaways is that clients were very curious about the gel. Providers remarked that there was a lot of interest, a lot of curiosity about this gel, that many had not encountered something similar. In terms of whether users liked or disliked the gel, there were a variety of responses. Some really liked it. Some reported that their partners really liked it, that the lubricating factor of the gel was something they really appreciated. Others reported that they didn't like it so much. If you click next, should be more information. Yep. So then male engagement, and a reminder that this comes from our IDIs with women providers and men. Many men, when we spoke to them, said that they were supportive of FP in general and of Caya specifically. And women shared something similar. Most reported that their husbands supported their use of Caya. And 16 of the women that we spoke to talked about having spoken with their husbands about Caya, and that their husbands were satisfied with the method. On the other hand, some women shared that they had never discussed their Caya use with their partner, and so couldn't speak to whether their partner appreciated the method or liked the method or not. And then there were a couple of women who shared that they chose to use Caya because it could be a discrete method. And so specifically, we're choosing it for that reason. 4 of the providers that we talked about did say that they had spoken with clients who had chosen Caya because it was a discrete method, and that they were using it without their partner's knowledge. Next slide. I also see that there's some questions coming in the chat, and noted, and we have a time at the end where we'll look at some of these questions and open up for discussion. This is my last results slide for Niger, looking at programmatic considerations. if you remember back to how this method, the model for the method introduction for Niger, we worked through these 3 different channels, one of which was with CHWs and community distribution. And the women that we spoke to were really appreciative of these women who are working in their communities, offering Caya directly to women, and were very available to speak with users or potential users. Women said that they felt very at ease with them and found it easy to speak with them and ask them trivial or intimate questions. All of the providers that were trained through this introduction were also provided with a pelvic model that they could use to demonstrate the insertion and removal of Caya, and that they could allow potential users to practice on. And all of the providers stated that this was a really critical tool for them. And it was one of the things, the key things that allowed users to then use the method successfully. Next slide. So just a few conclusions, thinking about all these results as a whole. In general, Caya was really well received in Niger, even in this context that's really hard to work in, where FP use is really low, and where opposition to modern FP can sometimes be quite high. Women, I mentioned this earlier, women who have infrequent sex may be a key population for Caya. Caya did serve as an entry point for new users, so it is something that new users could be interested in and might adopt as their first FP method. After counseling, similar to other places where we've asked this question, after counseling, many women say that Caya is easy to use. And then, reflective of my previous slide, provider trainings on Caya, the job aids, and the pelvic models that they use were a really important piece of this introduction model, and are very important for clients successfully using the method. And then this introduction took place in Niamey, which is an urban center. And those of us who have worked on the activity, and then we've heard this reflected from some of our stakeholders and country, we know it would be really interesting to see more information, more research, asking some of the same questions, but in a rural zone. So something to think about in the future. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Ando, who's going to share about the introduction and research that's taking place in Benin.
Thanks, Alexandra, and hello, everyone. This is my pleasure to talk about the initial results of Caya introduction in Benin from the pilot that has been led by the Beninese Association for Marketing, Social and Communication, which is known as ABMS. But I think before we move further, Daniel, could you please pop up the question for the audience as well? So the question is, what is the Beninese modern contraceptive prevalence among all women? And you have a single choice among the 4. I will submit myself. All right, okay. Okay, I can tell from this poll that many of us, almost all of us, know a bit about Benin family planning context. And indeed, Benin's contraceptive rates among women in union and all women both remain below 14%. Next slide, can you please share? And at 30, as you can see on the slide, at 35%, Benin is one of those countries with high proportion of women with unmet need for modern contraception. And as you may know, the main reasons for non-use of contraception here in Benin is the fear of side effects and concerns around methods involving hormones. I don't remember if Alexandra has mentioned the same for Niger. We don't have here much about opposition, but it's mainly the fear about hormonal methods. And so, next slide. ABMS has commenced the pilot introduction of Caya in 2020 with a model slightly different from the Niger one, as we only worked with the private sector using using ABMS franchise network of called ProFam clinics and a pool of interpersonal community agents in the two largest cities of the country, mainly Cotonou and Boycon. We have trained 27 clinic providers from 19 clinics from the ProFam network to correctly offer Caya, and also 16 interpersonal community agents, which are likely like the community health workers to create demand. And then over a period of 13 months running from November, next slide, from November 2020 to December 2021, we have reached almost 20,000 people, mainly the women and also some men, through interpersonal communication, and more than 150 women have adopted the Caya as their family planning method. Next slide. Okay. Among these adopters, these are those 3 satisfied ladies, Leontine, Valérie, and Peniel. They are our champion, from which we have captured testimonials in a video. We can share to you the link to the video later if you are interested too. But the summaries of their stories, it's written in French here, but unanimously they said Caya addressed their contraception needs. It dispels their concerns about the side effects of contraceptive method, and they find Caya convenient for use. So next slide. So prior to that, there is one prior to that. Okay, yeah. So today I'm excited to share with you the early results of the operational studies that ABMS has conducted with the same objectives as Niger that Alexandra has mentioned earlier, which is to understand the client experience and satisfaction with Caya, and to identify factors that might encourage and or hinder the Caya use in Benin. The studies, similar to Niger, consist of quantitative survey with 225 female users, coupled with in-depth interview of 60 persons comprised of providers. We've asked 15 providers, 15 women, 15 men partners, and 30 female users. And the data collection took place between September and December 2021, which corresponds to 6 months use of Caya for the minimum users. Next slide. I have to say that the Benin studies was much more larger and more in depth than the Niger one, and we don't have so far the final report, but we hope to gather as much as information as we could on discontinuation and method use from the quantitative data. And as I said, it has not been yet published. We, with PSI, ABMS is we are still considering the full results and to identify what to highlight and how to report and to present them. But on the slide, anyway, you'll see the major finding as follow. The typical Caya user in Benin is a woman in a monogamous union in her mid-20s, 30s. Average age is 31.8 years, and majority of them has at least one child during the study, and users are from across different education level. Slide. The non-hormonal nature of Caya is one of the most appealing reasons why almost 70% of those surveyed used Caya, and 78% of them reported they have chosen Caya because they've been told it causes no side effects, especially when it's related to menstrual bleedings. There would be no change in the menstrual bleedings patterns. Also, for the quarter of them, as you can see on the slide, they appreciate the fact that they have controls over the method, whereby they can decide if they have to start it, and to stop to use it at any time. And the same proportion of 25% found as an advantage the fact that Caya Diaphragm is to be inserted only moments before sex, which is convenient for majority of them who reported that they don't actually have frequent sex because their husband or their partners are traveling, and this is of great asset for them. And not only this, but they say Caya is reportedly easy to insert and to remove. Slide on overfinding is that up to 27.6% of the users were not using another modern contraceptive in the 3 months prior to adopting Caya, meaning that this is not a change this is not a swap of contraceptive, but it's a new adoption. And 5% of those women pair cycle beads and Caya as a fertility method as well. And in terms of continuation rate, the continuation rate here in Benin is like what we've seen in Niger at 76.4%. Slide. As a conclusion, in Benin, Caya is perceived as an additional contraceptive option rather than replacing an existing option. I've said that earlier. And the perception is generally positive among both the providers, the users, and their partners, who see the method as a good option for women who are wary of hormonal methods, and for women whose partners are often away from home, which is mainly the case for our users. And this makes those latter a potential key population for the method. I keep repeating the similarity with Niger, but here we've seen as well that the client understanding and the successful use of Caya really depends on the quality of counseling and availability of job aids. I've mentioned earlier that we have used the interpersonal community agent. Most of them would even come to the house of the users to show them using the mannequin on how to insert Caya properly. And this really helped in the consistent use of Caya. Next slide. All these findings indicate for, all these findings indicate for Benin that Caya could be well received in both urban and rural settings across Benin, where the attributes such as non-hormonal, easy to use, user control are those sought for women in Benin in terms of contraceptive method. If I may, I would add that the programmatic implication for the pilot for ABMS, as far as ABMS is concerned, is to keep engaging with the decision makers within the Ministry of Health. Because we want to discuss potential pathway to scale up Caya distribution to other settings. I've mentioned earlier that for now we've started only with the private sector, but based on what we've discussed with the providers, it's likely that there is also potential way to also go with the public sectors, and whether and when and how to include Caya into the national method mix. That's for my side. It was a bit quick compared to the Niger one. Thank you for your attention. And if some of you are interested with the video, perhaps Alexandra, can I put the video link in the chat?
I already did that as you were presenting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Over to you then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ando. So we have some time here just to respond to some questions and then to have a little bit more of a discussion, talk about some of the things that you find interesting and what we've learned, and perhaps ask you some questions as well. There's been some conversation in the chat And so I've been trying to respond to a couple of things. I also put in a couple of links. Both Ando and I mentioned a couple of other resources or other places where you could learn a little bit more. So I did put the link for the video, which is wonderful. And I also put the link for the article that shares the results from the research in Niger in GHSP. Should I maybe revisit some of these questions in the chat? I may do that. So some of them I've responded to a little bit. And you asked this question about using Caya in conjunction with standard days method. And Ando shared a little bit about what we've seen in Benin, that some women are using it, that a good amount of women are using Caya alongside some other FAM method or a way that they're tracking their fertile periods, including pairing Caya with cycle beads. Patricia, you asked some really interesting questions. One of them was around the rationale for using Caya and OCPs at the same time. We didn't get a lot of detailed rationale or reasoning for this. Women would say that sometimes Caya felt like a convenient thing to be using for a certain period of time. Other times oral contraceptive pills were what were responded to more of their needs. Can you describe the discomfort felt by women a bit more? I think it'll be interesting to hear what we'll see in some of the IDI information from Benin. In Niger, this information came sometimes from providers, what they had heard from clients. The women that we spoke to that were included in IDIs in Niger were all continuing, all but one continuing users, and the other one was someone who was no longer using because she was pregnant. And so they themselves were comfortable with the method and satisfied with it. Providers shared that some clients who chose to discontinue or didn't adopt the method shared that it was too large or that women found it irritating. So that's the information I have for you there. Why is it called Caya? And then you mentioned that Caya has another meaning in Bambara. We did do some formative research around the name of Caya, which is the name of the product that it's known by worldwide, and opted in the end to stay with Caya. It wasn't something that came up as a having another meaning or needing to be flagged as a name for some reason in Niger or Benin. So we did stay with that name. I'm scrolling through. What are customary practices around vaginal lubrication in Niger? How does this gel use align with these practices? This was not something that we asked specifically in our study. But many of the users reported that their husbands did like it, did appreciate the lubricating feel of the gel, and that women appreciated it as well. Maggie, you asked a little bit about the IDI population, the men in particular, who were sensitized to Caya. So no, men who were a part of the study did not have to be Caya users or the partners of Caya users. They simply had to have learned about the method in an FP information session led by the CHWs that were a part of this project. That being said, a couple of them were in fact partners of women who had adopted Caya. Did the CHWs, Patricia, did the CHWs follow up with every Caya user regardless of source of product, if they obtain the product at a clinic rather than through CHW? Yes, so in Niger, and Ando, I don't know if you, so in Benin, as Ando shared, women are getting it solely through the private sector. In Niger, women could opt to get it through private, public, or through community-based distribution. Most women were, by the end, over the course of the project, were getting it from the public sector, but included in our information in Niger, there were women who had gotten it from other places as well. regardless of where they had obtained, bought or obtained their Caya diaphragm in Niger, most women, all women, had interactions with CHW. So even if they had chosen to go to the public sector health center to actually obtain the method, they had interacted with the CHW. Jane, you asked about if there's been any discussion around the potential for use of Caya as a menstrual hygiene product. I don't believe we've had that specific conversation, but we have had conversations around, what can we learn from, what can we take from what we've learned introducing Caya to apply to similar types of interventions that might be introducing a menstrual cup. The products are not so dissimilar. Some of the concerns that women say they have about a menstrual cup versus Caya might be the same. So there could be a lot of really good cross-learning there. Scrolling down, I had answered some of the questions, so now I'm scrolling down to new questions. Jane, you said, I think it would be helpful to have Caya have a multi-purpose. It would make the product very attractive to a wide audience if used for menstrual hygiene as well. Women and girls would become more comfortable placing it and talking about it. I think that's really interesting. Caya isn't indicated for use as a menstrual hygiene product, but I certainly see that point. That would be really interesting. Scrolling down. So for women who were using OCPs, they were using them correctly and adding Caya on top. Doesn't really align with the rationale of convenience, since they were already using OCPs, or maybe they were using OCPs incorrectly. I think that that's a great question. And in our research, researchers didn't probe on the use of, on the specific use of OCPs, how they were offering instruction if women weren't using it correctly. So I mean, these questions are very, very interesting. If Caya stays more than 6 hours, is it recommended to use the gel? Why? So yes, Caya is Caya, after being inserted for sex, you leave it in for 6 hours. If you are to leave it in for longer or to use it again because you'll be having sex again, it is recommended to insert more gel. The gel forms sort of an added suction or seal around the diaphragm and the cervix. So this is why it's recommended to reapply gel after a certain amount of time. Yeah, Maggie, suggesting, and please, if anyone would like to come off mute, please do so. Suggest that you might rethink the focus on saying that Caya is a method appropriate for women who have infrequent sex. This could lead to misunderstandings, perhaps. What you mean is intermittent sex, when partners are away, yes. In the contraceptive effectiveness study, couples had on average 13 coital acts per month, so it does not have to be for women with infrequent sex, yes. If that means low number of coital acts per month, just thought about language. Thank you, very much appreciated. Did you probe on small amount of interviewees who had pain? Is there a possibility of them being allergic to the product? The product is made of silicone, and so likelihood of allergies is minimal. We didn't hear from people saying that they in Niger, didn't experience pain per se, rather described as discomfort. And that information was coming from what providers had seen in counseling clients, in speaking with clients after they had come back with questions about Caya or to use a different method. So the probing would have been more information from providers, not the women themselves. And so there was a limited amount that they could say that their clients had fed back to them. Yeah, so thank you, Danielle. So moving on to this next slide, we have a couple of questions for discussion, and it would be wonderful to hear from a few of you. Now that we're, coming into this next phase of these activities with EECO, Niger having published our findings and thinking about dissemination, Benin being in the place where they have gathered the results and are looking at analyzing them and then thinking about how to share them and where. These are some of the questions that are on our mind, and we'd be really interested to hear what thoughts you might have. And if you have further questions yourselves, please do go ahead and continue putting them in the chat. So our questions are around where to focus for continued dissemination, what unanswered questions still exist for, this is a big question, for FP product introduction and scale up, or questions around self-care FP products in particular, and how might our experience be able to address some of those questions. Different creative ways for sharing results now and in the future as Benin continues to analyze and think about publishing results. And then I think that, this question around potential of Caya to be coupled with other methods, particularly cycle beads or MFAM, is a question that we're interested in thinking about. And then a couple questions about, other next steps for Caya, for the Caya gel, for countries that are interested in scaling this method up. And as people are maybe thinking about these questions, I'll also say, we've not sat for very long with the results from Benin. As Ando shared, this is new information we're looking at, but it has been very interesting to see where where we've seen some sort of similar findings around the introduction in Benin and Niger. And although both countries are in West Africa and Francophone, they're quite different contexts. And so seeing a similar amount of women who are opting to continue using the method has been really interesting. Women who are having infrequent or intermittent sex, being a key population, has been something we've seen in both places and has been of interest for us. And then also, this key finding around introduction and models, and in particular counseling and adequate job aids being really important for women to feel empowered to continue using the method and also to use it correctly, has been some of the stuff that we've sort of seen reflected so far in looking at the results from Benin and Niger together.
Everybody's being so quiet.
I know.
The chat box was popping off during the presentation. There are a lot of big questions around this product. I think first and foremost, thank you to both of you for those presentations and for the work around this product. And it's great to see Maggie on the line as well, who has been part of the R&D of this product and engaged in was previously known as Silks and now Caya for a couple decades. So I think everybody was really surprised and excited about how well the product did, especially for Niger. The looks that we got when we said we were going to do a pilot introduction there were not optimistic. And it did really well, considering that context. There are programmatic issues and other issues around the gel, programming it just being a gel that liquefies in high heat. It's a product that has, that the gel part has to be reprocured. It is something that, women have to keep using after they bought the Caya Diaphragm. And some other issues around the gel, but we're trying to work through those because we do see that there is a really interesting niche and women who could really benefit from this product, but it is not without its challenges. So even if you are feeling quiet now, we could use folks' collective thoughts on how best to move forward with this product, and would appreciate the collective minds.
Hi, Tabitha and Alexandra. This is Maggie Kilbourne-Brook, and thank you so much for these presentations. It is really great to see this information. I had seen the information from Niger before, but had not received an update yet about Benin, so this is very exciting. I just want to say, I mean, I think there have been a lot of good questions in the chat and a lot of things to think about. But one of the things that I think is particularly helpful and valuable about the work that you're doing is that it continues to create evidence that women, even in very challenging circumstances, can learn how to use this very simple product. And even decades after we started this initiative to expand non-hormonal options for women by improving on the diaphragm design, we continue to encounter people who hold on to myths and misconceptions about what women will do and will not do. And just last week, we encountered people who were making decisions by saying, women will not touch themselves, women will not insert something into their vagina, women in low resource settings can't figure out how to use something like the diaphragm safely because of whatever the context of their environment is. And I think it takes many people working on products and product introductions to try to address those kinds of misconceptions that oftentimes are just folk wisdom that have been passed down. So it is exciting not only to see that women respond to a user-initiated non-hormonal method for all the reasons that we believe that they would, but also that in these experiences, we see that women can easily learn to use this product and that it doesn't have to be medicalized. It doesn't have to be provided at a clinic. What's most important is that they learn about the method from somebody who understands the method and believes in it and can respond to their questions. And we see that kind of circle of women peer-to-peer support in other places. And I just think it's an interesting model for us to think about in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. And I think we definitely saw some of what you are describing in Niger as well. This idea of people saying women aren't going to be interested in this product, or women will not opt to use this product for this or this reason, in a sort of theoretical way. And then once we get into the actual implementation and the pilot, we didn't see that. And this sort of theoretical concern didn't bear out. And so it's, you know, wonderful to then be able to share this and have some findings and research that can be used to speak to this concern in other places.
I think we have one question from Premila, so if you'd like to come off mute.
It's not a question. It's for myself. The two things that popped up was first the misconception that women were not going to fiddle with themselves to put the method in, and the other thing that I found very interesting is the fact that women prefer CHWs to give them the information that they need, and that someone has already mentioned it in the chat. And so it would be, sorry, Patricia Coffey has mentioned it in the chat, it would be a really good method to look at it for community-based distribution and or even the private sector, you know, with a CADA that can actually support them in an intimate kind of way. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the benefits of Caya is that you don't have to visit a provider to start using it. And so that lifts a lot of burden from those formal health channels from providers and makes it a method that can be accessed through many other places. That was a part of the, as you just said, that was a part of the introduction in Niger. And it was really interesting to see how women really appreciated those CHWs that they trusted that were available. In Benin, as you will have seen, the method, we haven't been able to introduce the method through direct community distribution, but the IPC agents that have worked in that introduction have also been a really critical piece of sharing information about Caya and demand generation.
And I think, Alexandra, we can take this one last question from Denise in the chat, and then we can wrap.
Yeah, what supply chain issues have you identified? What other diaphragms are available, and what does the market look like? No, I don't think we really discussed this, Denise, so thank you for this question. There are not other diaphragms widely available in these contexts. This was really a new opportunity for women and providers to learn about diaphragms. So Caya is the diaphragm available in these places. In terms of supply chain issues, Tabitha, you mentioned this a little bit, but the gel has to be resupplied. And it is also a product that requires a cool chain, has to stay in a cool area. And so that, particularly for Niger, but also for Benin, has been a challenge, ensuring that gel is resupplied at the rate that clients will need it. Need to resupply, and that there are places that it can be kept. Don't know, Ando, if you have other thoughts on that question, or?
Yeah. Is it a question around the registration?
Sorry, no, around supply chain.
The supply chain. The supply chain. Okay. Our issues was really, it's related to the registration. I'm sorry, I went further with them because initially we thought Caya should be seen as a medical product. So we thought we need to get authorization to distribute, only to realize it's seen as an equipment. So it takes us a while to get the authorization to distribute here in Benin. But in terms of supply chain, that's a question right now, because we have to resupply with gel, and there is not much to order. But I would say basically it's if we got a higher quantity to resupply, it would be easier for us.
Thank you, Ando. And I know we're at time, so I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and for your questions and for your thoughts and recommendations. And I'm glad that this call was recorded, because we'll go back and look at some of the other things you've shared in the chat.
Great, thank you for great presentations, and thanks for everybody's participation. There'll be more information on, especially about Benin coming, so thank you.
Thanks, everyone.